for the benefit of humans, not for God's benefit, basically. That's Malebranche's thought. And then you say at the top of 9, Leibniz cannot endorse any reply to Bayle that compromises this fundamental doctrine that the human mind is an image or mirror of God.
Right.
But I didn't understand how Malebranche's idea there that God doesn't need our worship did compromise that. So I'd just like to hear a little more about how those two are connected.
Well, of course, Leibniz, I've lost the passage, but Leibniz misreads Malebranche. Leibniz takes Malebranche to be saying that the most excellent of his creatures are nothing to God, whereas Malebranche doesn't say that. He says being worshipped by the most excellent of his creatures are nothing to God. To say that the most excellent of his creatures are nothing to God, and that God really doesn't care what happens at the fall, and that's why he doesn't intervene to prevent it. That, I think, really is in conflict with what I take to be one of the main, perhaps the central theme of Leibniz's philosophy, his metaphysics at least, that the human mind is a mirror of God, and indeed, to some extent, all substances are. To say that God is indifferent, isn't there a clear tension between saying that God is indifferent to the most excellent of his creatures? Isn't clear that's in tension with saying that human minds are mirrors of God? Of course, Malebranche does speak of the most excellent of his creatures, and of course, as an Augustinian, he believes that mind is a more noble substance than matter is. If he hadn't spoken of excellence at all in connection with human minds, then we'd have a more fundamental conflict with Leibnizian principles. But the kind of indifference that Malebranche writes about in the case of God and his relationship to human beings, well, it's certainly in conflict with Leibniz's often stated claims, especially prominent in the Discourse on Metaphysics, that because human minds are so excellent, so noble, God has a special care for them and makes their welfare his central goal. So perhaps that's what I should have said.
Okay.
Yeah, a short remark on the distinction you make between two senses of theodicy,
Yes.
the broad sense and the narrow sense. I think this distinction is not relevant in Leibniz because the perfection of the universe and the welfare of man are inseparable. Sorry for my English. As you can see, for example, in the preface of the Theodicy, he said that God cares of everything and even hair of our head, and that if we can see that, we can see that nothing is better to wish. Absolutely, but also for us, he said that. And in other section, in section 217, he make an answer to Marcus Aurelius, and to make a distinction between fatum stoicum and fatum Christianum. And he said that a thing does not become more lovable, better, because it is necessary. And evil for me does not become good because it is the good of my master. So it is important to think together, I think, the perfection of the whole universe and the happiness and welfare of man. Because if you don't make this distinction, you don't have the difference between fatum stoicum and fatum Christianum, because the fatum Christianum integrates those two dimensions of theodicy, I think.
Well, I think the distinction is worth drawing in general because it's a way of driving a wedge between the cases of Leibniz and Malebranche. That was my motivation for doing it. Of course, Leibniz wants to say that the world is, in some sense, the best physically and the best morally. And it's controversial. Well, there are various scholarly controversies in this area. I mean, two that spring to mind. One is the controversy over whether there's a trade-off here, say, between the physical perfection of the universe and its moral perfection. There are other versions of the issue of trade-off, or whether the best possible world is the one which has both the most physical perfection and the most moral perfection. There's also the relationship, there's the issue of the logical relationship between the physical perfection and the moral perfection, and whether Leibniz seeks to infer that this is the most morally perfect of possible worlds on the basis of its physical perfection. Greg Brown has argued that Leibniz does want to make that inference, which seems troublesome. But I think I agree with a lot of what you say, but for the purposes of driving a wedge between Malebranche and Leibniz, I think it's useful to make that distinction between two senses of the term theodicy. There's something that Leibniz is doing that Malebranche isn't, and I think it's a mistake to assimilate Malebranche's project to that of Leibniz, or to read it in that of Leibniz, in the light of that of Leibniz.
Okay. Andrew.
Thanks. I just wanted to ask very quickly in sort of connection with Sukjae's second point about the general volitions versus particular volitions. It does seem as though Malebranche is concerned about the pious man in the Search and in the treatise over and over again, and the fact that the house falls on his head. And so I wonder if you think of that as at least something approaching the narrow sort of theodical concern that you were discussing.
Maybe. I cited one passage in the Treatise of Nature and Grace. Maybe there are others that should be cited. But very often when it looks as if Malebranche is concerned with the sufferings of the innocent, he's not at all. He's concerned with the aesthetics of the issue.
The overall global...
Could have produced more perfection, but to do so would have compromised the orderliness of his ways. There may be more passages than I admit in which Malebranche is straightforwardly concerned with apparent injustice towards certain human beings. But I think the overall emphasis is not on that at all, but on vindicating the aesthetic order of the universe and showing that it's consistent. Everything about the universe is consistent with a God who acts out of self-love and is concerned that what he creates glorify him. And that, as I said, he has a straightforward answer to the question. Aren't there lots of innocent people who suffer unjustly? No, there ain't, except for Christ and I suppose as a Catholic, his mother. No, there ain't, because of original sin. But you may be able to point me to some passages that suggest more concern with the question of justice as opposed to aesthetic orderliness than I have.
That was meant to be a quick point in support of Sukjae. A really quick question about Leibniz, and I know we're running out of time. With respect to the conditions on a sage's or a truly virtuous person's reaction to physical evil that you mentioned, you say, unlike the Victorian woman who is supposed to just think of England or the other savages who have various other techniques, the truly virtuous person will also not just think about joy or have joy or set joy as his or her end, but also do this in a way that's not morally neutral or dubious. And I wondered if someone really is innocent in this case and an adult and truly virtuous, why, if it just so happens psychologically that for them a morally neutral psychological technique is the only thing that will work, something analogous to thinking of England, if you will, or looking at the dentist's wallpaper. Why would Leibniz resist the thought that that would be appropriate if that's what gives the person joy?
Well, maybe that's a stage that we should pass through, and that would be very much in the spirit of Leibniz, right? We begin by, with techniques that are perhaps even morally dubious or just neutral, like staring hard at the pattern in the curtains. That's the way it is with someone near the beginning of the process that Sukjae talked about but the more virtuous become, the more able we are to